Good evening, everybody. The Music Fan is back, bringing smiles to the faces, knowledge to the people, and most importantly, music to the masses. I'm finally ready to get back into the album review game. That also means that I need to make up for lost time. So I'm happy to reintroduce a series that I tried out last year, which is 7 to Satisfy. Now you may ask, what is this series going to entail? And I think it's pretty self-explanatory from the title. Each week, I'm going to be going over 7 albums. Usually, I'm going to try to do a theme for each episode. I'll be going over some albums from the current month. I'll also be going over some albums from earlier in the year so I can catch up on everything I want to talk about. And then after each album, I will give it 1 of 5 ratings. The highest one being play on repeat. Pretty self-explanatory. Full album is the next one. Underneath that is pick and choose, which is picking the majority of the album and eschewing some of the other lesser tracks. Then you have just the hits, which is listen to just the singles. And then finally, skip it. Don't listen to it at all. Not worth your time. After going over all 7 albums, I will rank them from worst to best in my opinion. So the theme this time around is progressive rock, metal, hard rock, all in the heavier stuff, stuff that I really enjoy. Let's start off with Steven Wilson and The Future Bites. Now this is the 6th solo album from English progressive rock musician, singer, songwriter, and record producer Steven Wilson. I have grown to become a huge fan of Porcupine Tree ever since I got to Boston, really. I was introduced to this band from one of my coworkers when I started working at Grafton. I didn't like them, as much as first, but I started to really dive into their work, especially a lot more last year and the year before. Eventually, I would love to talk about all of Porcupine Tree's albums, but my personal favorites are Deathwing, Fear of a Blank Planet, as well as In Absentia. And honestly, their last album, The Incident, even though I don't like it as a whole album, there are some bits and pieces that I super love. Time Flies is a beautiful, beautiful song. I have grown to appreciate Steven Wilson's solo work much more over the years. I remember listening to Hand Cannot Erase when it came out, but not really realizing that it was him at the time, but super liking it. So much that I continued to listen to 4.5 as well as To the Bone. To the Bone being one of my top 50 albums of that year, and 4.5 I think it was a borderline top 50 if not for the fact that it was an EP. I checked out Anthony Fantano's review on The Future Bites, and from what I understood, he really enjoyed this one. Not many people did. He has not necessarily enjoyed a lot of what Steven Wilson has done before. He thought it was a lot of progressive paint by numbers and not really much emotion to it. That made me want to check out the rest of this work first to see maybe there's something to this. I had never listened to the other 3 albums from him, and to be honest, as much as The Raven That Refused to Sing is a cult classic, I still love Hand Cannot Erase more. I find the experimenting on The Raven interesting, and I also adore the song Drive Home. I think it's one of Steven Wilson's best songs, but I think so much more of Hand Cannot Erase is better. Grace for Drowning, to me, I didn't really remember. Insurgentis, I have grown to like. It's a lot of building arrangements. However, I would still probably put Hand Cannot Erase, Raven, and To the Bone above all of those. To the Bone, I do understand people getting angry about this album because it is a little bit more on the popish side and a little bit more varied in ideas. Not necessarily a cohesive whole idea, but still I find a lot of the stuff really fun to listen to. I love the title track. I love Same Asylum as Before. Permeating, even though it is a very poppy song, I just can't stop listening to that refrain. Hearing about The Future Bites, I didn't really check out any of the teaser tracks beforehand. I finally dived into it. And I think I'm in the middle between what Anthony and what others are feeling. I don't think this is a terrible album. You kind of saw bits and pieces of what this album was going to be from previous albums, from Stephen Wilson. I think there's parts of To the Bone that you can hear the more poppy ideas and like more electronic ideas. I think even on Hankin on a Race you got some more electronic ideas at points. I don't think this is something that is totally out of left field, but I can understand why some people feel underwhelmed by this album. Comparatively to everything else that Stephen Wilson has done, this is by far the most mainstream and less progressive album that he has ever done. There are very, very few times where you have a super interesting chord progression that is progressive, or a change in tempo or time signatures that warrant a progressive term. That being said, I don't hate most of this album. In fact, there's a lot of stuff on here that I find super fun. A lot of this album has this like cynical and diabolical sound because it is talking about technology nowadays, the end of the world caused by technology, and the ego of self and the consumerism. A lot of the sound of this album resonates with that message. Starting off with Self, you got this song that has a very sparse melodic and lyrical nature at the beginning, where it's all these play on words with self, but it works so well because the arrangement around it is super minimal. You get this nice build into the chorus. It almost feels gospel-like at times, which could like kind of work into the idea of the new gospel being technology and consumerism. And it's a really nice contrast with the verses. Even this quasi-guitar solo feels unhinged because of the arrangement around it. You don't get a lot of guitar work other than minimal stuff at the beginning of it, but when you get this unhinged guitar with just random timing, that's where things feel a little bit uneasy. And it's honestly not the first time that you're going to be hearing a guitar solo like that throughout the album. To keep up with that vibe, you also have Eminent Sleaze with what feels like Stephen Wilson playing out his perfect Bond villain fantasy, which you can also see in like the music video where it's like an evil villain trying to grab a particular product that's safeguarded and like doing all that caper shit. This also has a sparse beginning with bass guitar, claps, and strings. I like the very subtle string work connected to that more heavy bass guitar. It does eventually pick up when you get to that "it's never ending, yeah." Then that groove comes in that feels kind of pseudo funk disco-ish. This guitar solo there is also sporadic. I like it the most because it kind of mixes between minor and major. It's just like a bunch of like chords that he's playing, but it's hectic, it's sporadic. Like with Self, it feels like it's moving out of the concept of what a solo can be in a weird way, which again makes it a little bit more unhinged. Personal Shopper on that same end is the quintessential main piece though. Such a good song. It's 9 minutes long. This song encapsulates everything of what the rest of this album has been working for. This dystopian dance song about consumerism. This song builds so well, where it starts off with a little bit of electronic tinge at the beginning and a little bit of keyboard work and like a little bit of electronic bass, so you get an idea of what the sound is supposed to be and what the chord progression is. And you get this falsetto from Stephen Wilson that is a little bit meek, but also a little bit of like a beacon of hope or false hope, where if you buy these things, you will become the person you want to be. Eventually, what I love is the drum machine and the bass that come in. This bass chugs along throughout the song, while the drum machine stands out for some very simple yet effective drum fills. What I really enjoy are some of the ones that come in on the chorus, where it fills right at the beginning of the chorus and then brings that beat in. I absolutely adore this chorus too. It's one of my favorite choruses of 2021 so far. It's an earworm, super ironic for what this song is supposed to be about, consumerism and buying more and more and more. The chord progression on the post-chorus is a little funky, but at least I enjoy the chromaticism that is used in the melody, and it adds some complexity that you haven't heard much of throughout the whole entire album. Also, I enjoy this breakdown with Elton John listing off products in a very super like robotic tone of like anti-aging cream and earbuds and volcanic ash soap. And I believe what's happening while that's going on is that post-chorus chord progression is being elongated throughout that part. It ends with another tweaked out guitar solo. It's not as good as the Eminent Sleaze one, but it's still stands out because it has a little bit more activity. It's a little bit more fast paced. I do enjoy a lot of that song and is up there for one of my favorite songs of the year so far. Other highlights on this album, you got Follower with some just like in your face progressive rock that has a super catchy chorus line, which is, ooh, follow me, follow me, ooh, follow me, follow me. Easy enough for a song about wanting to be other people. I think the vocals are a little bit weird on the verses, but it gets much better when the piano and the harmonies come in. This makes it feel a little bit more organic, which is something that you don't usually hear a lot of on this album. It feels a little bit more Beatles-esque, a little bit more of that psychedelic rock, which is a nice touch on an album that's almost strictly electronic. Another song on here that is a highlight for me is 12 Things That I Forgot. This doesn't necessarily fit the musical vibe of the rest of the album. It reminds me of stuff off of more of Lightbulb Sun or Stupid Dream from Porcupine Tree, but it is nice to at least have this break from the electronic. It is the softest song on the album, where it's talking about the past getting older and not caring as much with age. It just has this nostalgic feel. I do enjoy the chord progression. It's not super proggy, but it has enough touches of chromaticism that make me yearn for other stuff that he has done. Definitely some decent tracks on this album. However, there are some things that don't really stand out that well in my opinion. Unself is basically just a transition into Self. Man of the People reminds me of Song of I from To the Bone. It's very sparse and atmospheric with a tinge of dark, however. It doesn't have really much of an interesting chord progression. This is one of a few songs where there's auto-tuned vocals, and it just doesn't fit the vibe of the rest of the song in my opinion. And then you have Count of Unease, which is another atmospheric song, but this is a little bit more on the pleasant side. Most of the song starts off with just like shaker, piano, vocals, and synth, and I do like getting lost in the ambiance of this particular song. However, it does get a little bit aimless at times, with the middle section going on longer than it probably should have. That being said, I do like it as a closer. However, the one part on this album that I just cannot get into is King Ghost, which is interesting because with Anthony Fantano talking about how not bad this album is, he weirdly forgot about this particular song to talk about. King Ghost is another atmospheric song with electronics and synth being the main focus. The vibe is alright, but the vocals are super annoying. I don't like the reverb on Steven Wilson's voice in the verses, and although the chorus melody is nice, it doesn't work when it is thinned out and pitched higher like it is. It could have been an interesting song, it could have been a nice touch, because honestly, Steven Wilson doesn't really do a lot of that experimenting on the atmospheric side like that, but it left a lot to be desired. Overall, I do like most of the vibe of this album. Yeah, it's not necessarily super progressive, but at the end of the day, it's still a hell of an album. Like I've said before with like the Leprous album and other albums that eschew their main idea for something a little bit more poppy. If I could hear more pop stuff like this, I'd be happy. Overall, I'm going to say play the full album. Yeah, there are bits and pieces that I'm not a huge fan of, but there's only one real song that I'm just like skip. It is 9 tracks and like about 40 minutes, so it's not a bad time whatsoever. I think still I go with Hand Cannot Erase and To the Bone a little bit better than this, and probably The Raven as well, but hey, this is like solidly in the middle of what Steven Wilson does, and I would just like to see this idea but a little bit more progressive. Next up we got Foo Fighters with Medicine at Midnight. This is their 10th album and the first one in 4 years after Concrete and Gold. I super enjoy a lot of what this band does. What can you say about their first 2 albums, Foo Fighters and The Color and the Shape? Instant classics in the rock realm. But There's Nothing Left to Lose, Echo, Silence, Patience and Grace, and Wasting Light are also phenomenal. I would probably say that my top 3 are The Color and the Shape, Wasting Light, and Echo, Silence, Patience and Grace. I think that one is kind of an underrated album that a lot of people sleep on. What I also really enjoy about this band is their use of dynamics and building. A song like Let It Die off of Echo, Silence, Patience and Grace, a prime example of a way that you can build a song so well just by adding more parts and changing the dynamics. Sonic Highways and Concrete and Gold aren't necessarily torchbearers when it comes to rock, but there's a lot of stuff on there that I still really enjoyed. Something from Nothing from Sonic Highways and Run from Concrete and Gold, as well as Dirty Water. Of course, whenever I hear that there is a new Foo Fighters album, I gotta check it out. This one is a little bit more diverse than you usually hear from this band. You get a song like Shame Shame, which is super understated with its groove. The drum roll on there is just absolutely gorgeous, kind of works very well with the rain dynamics that's going on throughout the song. It keeps a steady groove without going over the top. And then combine that with the simplistic but rhythmic guitar lines and the pizzicato string lines, and it makes for a vibrant yet understated arrangement. I also love how the vocals fall around that. The chorus has some power, but nothing too over the top. And I really enjoyed that chord progression of A minor, G, F, and D, all around my favorite song on the album. Making a Fire as a beginning is a kick-ass way to start the album. Love the 3/4 feel of this song. The chromatic approach on the verses is also pleasing to the ear, especially when the second guitar comes in with that other chromatic line. It's just super cool. The chorus is kind of over the top, a little bit poppy for them, but it's so much fun in my opinion. And the additional vocals around the song add another nice touch. Great layering throughout this song. It does feel like those voices are looped just a little bit, but it's not something that breaks me from that vibe. Cloud Spotter uses that soft, loud, dynamic approach that I enjoy from this band. The verses feel more playful, almost like a Two-Door Cinema Club song. The electronic drums feel weird for what Taylor Hawkins does, because I don't really think of him as an electronic drummer, but it's not out of place for this particular song. And then you get into that boom of the chorus. It feels like something that I've heard before, which is a little bit of a detriment, but it's still solid, and at least I love the playfulness and the banter between the soft and loud on here. Then you get a song like No Son of Mine, which is the band's way of going to do a second line song. It feels kind of jazzy, it feels kind of dancey, especially with the bluesy guitar and the active drums. And it kind of fits well for Dave Grohl trying to do his best Priest impersonation. He's basically talking about his son, making sure that his son doesn't fall into the ills of the world and being there for him to make sure that that doesn't happen. The chorus absolutely rocks. I just love the vibe of that whole entire thing. So much power. The only problem I have with the song is it doesn't get into that second line feel until halfway through that first verse. So when he's singing it, it doesn't feel like it's supposed to be that feel until you actually get the drums in. That's a little bit shaky, wonky, but once the feel gets in, it is one of the highlights on this album. Holding Poison feels like a throwback to Wasting Light. It honestly reminds me of Back and Forth with its playfulness. The drums are super playful with what sounds like parts of it being played on milk bottles. The guitars have so many different layered parts, and again, the vocals fit around those guitar parts rather than going over it, which I think is pretty cool. The change up to the dance beat in the chorus is a nice touch as well, but also what I love is that the guitars add more parts as the song goes on. The spinning around part is a pretty cool idea, though it feels like kind of simplistic when it's just like spinning around, 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 spinning around. I get it. It's supposed to make this whirlwind feel and feel dizzy and stuff like that. But I know that there are other songs that they have done that use that same approach that are a little bit more complex in the idea. The change in the groove, though, for the solo is a little bit weird, but I like it. A little bit more heavy, kind of metal, this galloping 6/8 feel. Though I don't know why they went back to it at the end. Didn't really work for me. You also do have some other songs that are a little bit lighter. Waiting on the War is not bad, just not really original when it comes to them. It kind of sounds like Times Like These. It sounds like an anthem for the younger generation, and I super appreciate that. The build up of tempo at the end, it's a different way of them approaching how to change a song, and it's not a bad idea, but I honestly think that there are other ballads that they have done that are better. Medicine at Midnight is another different approach. It feels kind of like a disco funk tune, but just like a light disco funk tune. It's not bad, but it's just not my favorite. There's some interesting guitar lines and a decent chorus, but when you get to that rain on the dance floor, back against the ropes, it just feels so cheesy. My guess is there will be a music video where it's all these older guys dancing at a young club and everyone's dancing to their like trance stuff, but they're trying to do more disco stuff and they have like a disco suit on and, you know, are trying to like be the heroes at this club. I just feel like it's a bunch of older people trying to be hip. It's a swing and a miss for this one. And then finally, with the closer, Love Dies Young, you got this, what feels a little bit more like a mainstream pop rock song at times. It feels almost like what I imagine some Killer songs would be like in terms of the arrangement, but just a little bit harder. Most of the song is the chorus where it's just like, love dies young, young, love dies young. Most of the song is them just repeating that, and the please don't take my breath, take my breath away. And also the sentiment is also weird for a song that's so upbeat. Why are they talking about love dying and not wanting to be a part of love if love is all just what that is? You don't want to be in love because eventually it will die. That doesn't seem like a song that you would want to end your album with. But the biggest misstep is their approach into psychedelic rock, which is Chasing Birds. It seems like they tried a song that they thought the Beatles would do, and it comes almost as cliche as High as a Kite from Weezer's album a few years back. It's just like chasing birds to get high, I'm never coming down, I'm 6 feet underground. All the cliches that you could ever think about when it comes to psychedelic rock, just throw it in, makes for a super bland and unoriginal song. The thing is with this album, it's not bad, but comparatively to all their stuff in the 2010s, it definitely leaves a lot to be desired. I do appreciate a lot of the experiments that they've tried. Trying to throw in some more modern sounds is a nice breath of fresh air for them. I would love to see what they could do with modern sounds. Someone like Dave Grohl, I feel like for as long as he's been in the game, he could definitely approach this modern idea in a very interesting way. I just don't think it worked very well throughout this album. There are some stuff that would definitely go back to Shame Shame, Making a Fire, Holding Poison. I think there's enough diversity on here where I could listen to this album and not get angry at it. But I don't think there's enough there to satiate Foo Fighters fans for extended periods. So for me, it's a full-on listen, not a long album, and there's enough stuff there that makes some of the more frustrating parts not stand out. Next up, we got Loathe with The Things They Believe. This is the third album from British metalcore new metal band Loathe. This actually dropped a year to the day from their previous album, I Let It In, and it took everything. If you watch my video on the top 10 albums of 2020, my brother named I Let It In and Took Everything as his #1 album of the year. The approach of metalcore in a different light, kind of like Deftones, but a little bit more varied than what the Deftones has done recently. There was a bunch of super heavy stuff, but also a bunch of lighter things that were super memorable. I personally didn't put it in my top 50. It was kind of around my honorable mentions. I probably, if I listened to it again, would have started to enjoy it more and more. But I did see a lot of what I liked there. So much so that I was super interested in checking out this next album. I thought it was super interesting to have a new album so quickly after such a big album like this. And then I read a little bit about it, and I found it interesting that they would include a saxophonist, and not just any saxophonist, but the saxophonist from the 1975 John Watt. So I was not exactly sure what this album was going to be. First time through, I was super surprised. So I'm going to give this a warning immediately. This is not I Let It In and It Took Everything. Not even close. This album is a ambient album. This is a 12-track CD and about 36 minutes of material. Basically, it almost functions like one full track where a lot of the stuff flows in onto each other. So for me to talk about it in individual songs, it's kind of hard, but I can at least do that for a little bit. The feature of this album is Keep Fighting the Good Fight. It has a super nice ebb and flow over its 9 minutes of runtime. It's one of the songs where I could just sit back and relax and listen and take everything in and feel like that there was enough time to process everything. Some other songs that hit that mark, Black Marble, which has some actual movement. There aren't a lot of songs on here that have any sort of percussion, and even with that, it's not a lot of percussion, it's just a little bit of percussion. But with that, it gave the melody some movement and gave this song some momentum. Perpetual Sunday Evening is super sweet. It almost feels like I'm listening to like the music of a wind-up toy mixed with some like ambient noise in the background. Super peaceful. Definitely could fall asleep to it. The Rain Outside is a solid closer. I love to use the guitar and saxophone to create tension and release. Has a super beautiful vibe. You Never Came Back feels very introspective and comes at you at waves, almost to the point where you almost don't even realize that the song is ending just because of how it flows. Love in Real Time, The Year, Everything and Nothing Happened. I think most of these are highlights. However, kind of like with Aporia from 2020, something that is a little bit hard for this album is that it's 12 tracks, 36 minutes long. One of the songs is 9 minutes. So that gives you 11 tracks over 27 minutes. After that, like every song is about 2 to 3 minutes long, some a minute long, some not. So there's a few songs that, like, even though the vibe is all right, it just doesn't have enough time to leave a lasting impression. Songs like Things They Believe, or Do You, or Remember, or The Moment, all these ones have some nice ideas in practice, but the execution just doesn't work fully because you don't have enough time to really enjoy everything. One particular song, Don't Get Hurt, part of one of the other songs transitions into Don't Get Hurt. So like a third of that song is still that transition part from the previous song, and then you get into Don't Get Hurt. So you're losing momentum there as well. Even with all that said, I think it's an interesting idea. I like that this band is able to experiment like this. I had no idea that they could do something like this. Is it the most amazing ambient electronic music I've heard in my life? No, but it's super peaceful and it just fits the bill of what I need for this album. I can honestly say it is worth a full listen. It's not long. You could definitely listen to it over and over again. It's not going to be like an album where you can pick and choose a song and be like, yeah, I really fuck with that, right? I just feel like it's a vibe. And if you're looking for something like that, there's worse vibes that you can listen to. I'm curious to see what Loathe does next, because I don't know. If they went from new metal and metalcore to something like this, what the heck is their next album going to be? Next up, we have Neuritius. Hopefully I said that right. It's the 9th album from Grays Lake, Illinois hard rock, alt metal, new metal, alt rock band Chevelle. This is a band that I have, from the outside, super enjoyed. It's weird because I've never fully listened to an album from theirs until The North Corridor. But this band has been permeating through my life since I was a teenager. I remember, I think like one of the Maddens, it probably was like 2004 or 2008, had The Clincher. Wasn't necessarily my favorite song, but it was something that like stuck in my brain to the point where like when I had MySpace, I had the song Vitamin R on my webpage because it was an awesome song. The Red is a phenomenal song by them as well. And weirdly enough, I remember driving from Amherst and having the radio on. The track from La Gargola, I believe it's called Take Out the Gunman, was playing. It wasn't until The North Corridor that I fully checked them out. Absolutely love that album. Was on the bottom half of my top 50. Of course, I was going to check out this, especially when I heard it was a concept album about Mars and space exploration and the state of the world. It was like, cool, you got me. Sign me up. And what can I say? Like, this album is very similar to other albums from them. If you don't mess with their vibe, I don't think this is going to be the one that's going to get you onto them. However, if you fuck with this vibe, then it's going to fuck back right with you. It's super solid. Every song, for the most part, just hits so well. Verrucht starts this album off with a bang, setting the tone for the rest of the album. The instrumental is plodding but heavy and reminds me something off of Tool's first 2 albums. And a lot of this album has that vibe of a little bit of Anima, a little bit of Undertow. So Long Mother Earth kicks so much ass. I love the flowing guitar lines over the chorus. It gives this song so much energy, on top of the fact that there's so many great powerful vocal lines on this particular song. The chorus vocals, to me, are the epitome of just the power on this song. Such a wild ride. And then that moves right into Mars Simula, which is super heavy on the bass and guitar, and yet it feels kind of playful, especially when it gets the "I'm on my way to Mars," because of those dynamics and playful vocals from Pete Loeffler. Self-Destructor, another super solid arrangement with frenetic guitar lines and intensely active drumming. Pete does a great job on the vocals throughout the song. Specifically, another solid chorus line when you get to the "you want it all" part, of course an octave higher. Pistol Star reminds me of definitely a Tool song, kind of like Schism in terms of the guitar line and the ambiance and like the darkness of it. It kind of plods along sometimes, but I enjoy the tension and the building and the layering of guitar parts throughout. Peach, so diabolical, so nefarious. Makes sense because of the song that kind of hints about Donald Trump with some of its lines. I love the feel of the song. They take your arms, now they'll take your legs. Now it just feels depraved at times, especially when the music dies down to the muted guitars and vocals. But then I love when the guitar picks up before the breakdown because it makes this song soar endlessly. Nice change of pace. It's this 3/4 anthemic acoustic ballad, and I like the apprehension throughout the piece. It builds slowly, but you get those timpanis in, you get the string parts in. I like how this song flows between 6/8 on the verses and the 3/4 in the chorus. Some of the best vocals from Pete on this album. Rounding out those like super strong songs, Ghost and Razor has a slow and heavy pace with vocals that feel sludgy and atmospheric at times. Feels definitely something off of Undertow. I just super enjoyed the vibe of that song and the vibe of a lot of these songs. And even the stuff that I'm not like super in love with, it's mostly because like interlude stuff, like Sleep the Deep feels like that transition part when they're going to Mars, them sleeping until they get to Mars. Wormhole is nice, but it just moves into Peach. Test enough. It feels like an interlude just because of the depth of this song. It's mostly just guitar work and vocals, which works for the most part until you get to the guitar solo and there's nothing else there. It feels a little bit weird. But that idea comes back on the closer, Lost in Digital Woods, which is an interesting closer. The first half is like piano and poetry. After reading the lyrics, I'm still not exactly sure what the spoken word is relating to, if it's part of this concept, but for the most part, it's interesting enough. And then you get that call back to Test. The only song I'm not like hugely fond of is Remember When, just because it feels weird in comparison to everything else on this album. So it's heavy in the guitar work and the distortion, but it's light in the chord progression. And I'm not a huge fan of the vocals overall. That being said, this is like one of my favorite albums of the year so far. It's actually vying with one other album that I'll be talking about later on. I can't say anything more than play it on repeat. I know this band is not for everybody, and like I said, if their vibe from before hasn't sold you yet, then this isn't going to either. But there's no super bad song on this album, and the whole entire vibe works so perfectly for me. Check this out if anything of what I said entices you, or if you like Chevelle, because you're going to love this. Next up, we got a couple of interesting metalcore albums. The first one is from A Day to Remember, and it's You're Welcome, the 7th album from the Ocala, Florida metalcore pop punk band. This is a band that I got onto later in life again. I remember being in wrestling and hearing I'm made of wax, Larry, what are you made of? Or If It Means a Lot to You. But I didn't listen to a full album of theirs until Common Courtesy. But man, that was a great way of getting onto them. It was one of my favorite albums of 2013. I think it was in my top 25, maybe top 20. Just like a super solid album from front to back with so much depth, so many great songs. End of Me, I'm Already Gone, Right Back at It Again. And honestly, even though it didn't make my top 50, I still really enjoyed Bad Vibrations for the most part. It wasn't as great. There are some stuff that was a little bit lackluster, like Paranoia, Naivety, but there are still some songs on there that I really enjoy. In Florida, Bullfight, Forgive and Forget, still a solid album. The thing with this one though is that I listened to the one teaser track that I remember, which was Resentment, and it was a song that I like, but saw that there was some pop electronic ideas, more mainstream ideas, and made me a little bit worried. I know that they did a collab with Marshmello that I actually do like, but I've seen other bands I like go the Imagine Dragons route. A few years ago we had Papa Roach who did that. Although I can definitely see this band doing something like this, it isn't something that I was excited to see. And unfortunately, it turned out that way. Honestly, the first time I listened through this, I was closing out work, and each time I heard a new song, I was like, what the fuck is this? And I was cursing under my breath. I told my brother about this. He agreed. He listened. He was like, this is garbage. However, I read some of the reviews, and one that stood out to me talked about the idea that this album could have worked, but they took those mainstream ideas a little bit too quickly. If they had gradually gotten to there, they thought it would have worked better. And honestly, I kind of agreed. After I took to this album again, re-listened, and took it from this perspective of more of a pop sound, I finally understood what was going on. That being said, I'm still not a huge fan of this album, but there are some stuff on here that I can get behind. I'll say most of this album, they are not hiding their new mainstream approach. Mind Reader, it's super poppy. Kind of like a Taylor Swift song in terms of the verse and chorus. But man, I can't lie, when I get to the part of the chorus, you're laughing like I'm supposed to know. That chorus just slaps. I'm not a fan of the mind reader part. It's super corny. In terms of highlights on this album, this is definitely one of them. What I also enjoy, as you'll see throughout this album, is this band is in their late 30s and 40s. Same thing with Papa Roach. They're not spring chickens anymore. They have kids. They have wives. They have more mature lives. So I understand if the angst isn't there, or the angst turns into a different way. For example, Mind Reader. Mind Reader is about Jeremy trying to understand his wife's mind and trying to read it. And I love the idea of the second verse talking about how he's going to Japan to talk to an old man to talk about the techniques of how to read women. It's cheesy, but I think it's funny. Resentment, listening to it again, it has those pop leanings, but it is one of the harder songs, and I do enjoy the vibe of the chorus. And the electronic resentment parts are annoying, as well as the Eye of the Tiger line. After reading through the lyrics, that breakdown doesn't really work, but still, it is one of the more enjoyable songs on the album. Permanent, another one of these ones that hit a little bit harder, and I do understand and appreciate the lyrical material about existential dread and anxiety about how nothing matters. The pre-chorus and the chorus are some of the better ones on the album, and this breakdown actually works in my opinion. The vibe of the whole entire song is super solid. And then Re-Entry, it makes me miss stuff from Common Courtesy and Bad Vibrations. It feels the most like an older Day to Remember song. Yes, there's that dance beat on the chorus. Yes, there's chanting vocals, but most of the song satiates what I've been missing from this album. Solid grooves, awesome vocals, a super catchy chorus. Of course, I enjoy the I just wanna go home. The layering of multiple guitar lines, a bridge that's actually interesting to listen to. Some of the best harmony lines on the album. I just wish that there was more of this throughout the album. There is another song like this that is a little bit heavier, but does still have that pop appeal, and that's Last Chance to Dance and Bad Friend. It's super heavy, but not super over the top. It's super raw as well. It harkens back to stuff of Common Courtesy. The only thing is the breakdown is not as amazing as the one on Permanent, but hey, beggars can't be choosers, I guess. To me, the one that sticks in my head all the time, and I'm a sucker for, and it's sad, but I love Everything We Need. Maybe it's because I actually watched the music video for that. Tugs on the heartstrings, especially someone who is getting closer to his 30s and someone who sees everything changing around me. This one hits hard. I love the line, I'm doing $120 on I-75 just to see if I'm dead or alive. The concept of the song is kind of cliche, but it fits very well. I love the acoustic vibe. I love the harmonies on this song. I love the chorus. I know I got you. You know you got me. We got everything we need. It's poppy. I get it. But if this song becomes a hit, I'll be happy. It's a good vibe. It's a good song. At the end, with him playing the guitar for his daughter, super touching. At least there are some things on here that second listen I can get behind. That being said, there are some stuff that is just super mediocre or just doesn't hit the mold at all. And it's mostly because of them going with this pop leaning. Bloodsucker is not even hiding what it's doing. The claps, the woe chants. I don't even know if the guitar parts are actually recorded or if they are looped. The pre-chorus has that like same chugging chord idea where it builds up to that breakdown. The problem I have with this song, right, is because this is so formulaic, when the chorus gets super heavy and noisy for no reason, it just doesn't work. Same thing with FYM, which is fuck you money. Super poppy. I at least like the idea of this song about wait till I get all the money, then I won't have to deal with this shit. The harmonies are cool on the pre-chorus, and the chorus is super catchy, but just leans way too poppy. Same thing with High Diving. It's pretty chill, and I appreciate that, as well as the message about taking time to find peace of mind and not be anxious around your partner, even when your partner's not communicating. It's a nice sentiment. However, super poppy with some clapping percussion and pretty formulaic arrangement. It looks like hell, pretty annoying verse, but the dark vibe and the solid chorus gives this song a little bit of a redeeming quality. I also just enjoyed the bounciness of it. Only Money has a great sentiment about understanding that life is not all about money. It's more about the people you're around and making sure you're there for them, because one day they'll be gone. It came from Jeremy losing his grandmother early. That is super touching. However, the music behind it, not interesting. It's pretty bland and probably the most pop-oriented song yet. There's barely any semblance of the band's sound. There's like a little bit of guitar lines and some acoustic guitar chords. The percussion is electronic, basically just electronic beats. The piano is electronic keyboard, and there's not really much of the band in this. I would have thought this was like a solo song from Jeremy, because it doesn't sound like the band at all. And then we get to the worst songs on the album. Brick Wall is super all over the place. Softer parts have muddy drumming and nasally vocals. It honestly doesn't even sound like Jeremy. The change of pace in the pre-chorus feels weird and out of place, and then the heavier breakdown in the chorus sounds way too muffled to be good. But the bridge ain't bad. Viva La Mexico, my god, super annoying. I understand it's a song about one of the bandmates' bachelor parties into Mexico, but it just sounds so phoned in and lifeless. The pre-chorus are annoying. The chord progression feels like it comes out of nowhere when it transitions into the chorus. The chorus is the best part, but not much better than the rest of the song. And the bridge sounds forced, as if the lead singer was kind of drunk, which would make sense because they were drinking in Mexico. The change in percussion and the muted guitar also doesn't help things. It kind of just feels like it's thrown in because it's a song about Mexico. Man, not a good song. And then Degenerates. Man, what can I say about this song other than it is pretty terrible? Peppy chanting vocals, the upbeat tone for the song, the mediocre vocals, the cheesy pre-chorus, all combined to make a pretty grating song. What also just pushes over the top though is the lame excuse for a breakdown at the end of the song to give this song some extra oomph and give it that A Day to Remember flair. Overall, I enjoy it more than I did when I first heard it, but honestly, it's a pick and choose. And it's honestly closer to just the hits than pick and choose, but I think there's enough stuff on here that's not just the singles that I do enjoy. It's a miss for me. I would listen to Mind Reader again. I would listen to Resentment, listen to Permanent, Last Chance to Dance, Re-Entry, and Everything We Need, but there's still a half of the album that I would not go back to if I had the choice. I think they went too quick to the pop sound. And even though there is stuff on here that I relate to and understand, it's just tough to fully enjoy this album. It might appeal to younger people who are trying to get into this stuff, but man, if you're a Day to Remember fan, this is not going to be something that you're going to be super happy with. The second of two metalcore albums, we have Architects with Those That Wish to Exist. This is the 9th album from the British metalcore band, and this is only the second one that I've listened to fully. This is a band that my brother knows more than I do. He was one that told me about their previous album, Holy Hell, one of his favorite albums of 2018. One that I enjoy, but I've always had a problem with metalcore to begin with, where it feels a little bit formulaic at times. A couple of years ago, there was Bring Me the Horizon's Amo, which got me into some more of their work because it felt diverse. I think the electronic work made that album become more complex, more enjoyable, more diverse in its sound, and more interesting to listen to. And then they followed that up with post-human survival horror. Even though it wasn't my favorite, and I'm not someone who necessarily reviews EPs, it was one of my brother's favorite albums of 2020, and I definitely see the appeal. A lot of heavy, depressing songs about the state of the world, technology, and about global warming, just this doomsday feel. There was a lot of really heavy hitting electronic songs, but also very heavy hitting metalcore songs. We're in a post-human world, according to Bring Me the Horizon. It's interesting that that's happened because that vibe, consciously or subconsciously, has moved over to what Architects is doing. It doesn't necessarily fully hit that Bring Me the Horizon sound, but there is a lot of songs about the state of the world in terms of politics, global warming, depression of the nowadays, where it feels like no one can do anything to save the state of the world. There's a lot of hopelessness on this album, but there's also a lot of aggression on here. A lot of this album is a little bit more simplistic than Holy Hell. A lot of the stuff does get a little bit more of that mainstream electronic sound. But unlike what Anthony Fantano says, I think the string parts and the drum parts make this album stand out a little bit more. Black Lungs, for example, has a vibe that's super similar to stuff that you would have heard on Amo or Post-Human, but the strings add a nice touch, something that you didn't really hear on either of those albums. The breakdown is strong enough that it pushes away the comparisons of Bring Me the Horizon, and the drum work is super solid throughout that song. Same thing with Discourse is Dead. I love the energy of that song. It's super heavy, flowing guitar lines, active drums, some scream vocals. You know, it's not out of the world original, but it works for me. Also, I love the sedatedness of the bridge part. It's very needed on this song. The only thing I don't really like is the change up of the melody on the final chorus, especially when you add those string parts in. It feels a little bit over the top, but it doesn't ruin the song for me. One song that does have that electronic feel that I super enjoy is Dead Butterflies. It just feels epic to me. I love the pace of the song. I love how intense the drums are. I love how it meshes the energy of the string and horn parts. The singing is super intense, and that chorus is just so good. Same thing with Flight Without Feathers. It's on the softer side. It's a little bit slower. For an album that's been super heavy up to that point, it's a nice reprieve. It does remind me a little bit of stuff off of Amo, especially some of the interlude songs. But it feels a little bit different than the electronics that Bring Me the Horizon were experimenting with. It just is beautiful. It's a good release of tension from the vocals on the verses and the pre-chorus. That makes it a comparative song to Bring Me the Horizon, but one that stands out on its own. Going back to it, I love the drum work on a lot of this stuff. Little Wonder has that prime example. It's some of the best drumming on the album so far when it comes to complexity and technique, combined with some of the best vocals on the album. Absolutely love the chorus on here. As a single, it's knocked out of the park in my opinion. Same thing with Animals. It just has that chug, even though the chug sounds super similar to This Is Halloween, This Is Halloween. Even though I can't get that out of my head, I still enjoy the simplisticness of this song, the chugging, the slower pace, the in-your-face intensity of this song. The electronics aren't super interesting, but it doesn't destroy how much I enjoy the chorus line. Love the idea of this song where it's talking about we're all just a bunch of fucking animals, but we're afraid of the outcome. The idea of us as humans doing whatever we want to the earth, but not really thinking about what the outcome of what that could be with global warming and everything like that. I forget exactly what the line is, but it's like the fiction that we're living in, telling that person to pull the pin and pull the plug on the earth. There's so much nihilistic anger from a lot of people, especially in our generation, where it feels like a lot of the stuff that we do doesn't matter. So I understand where he's coming from on that. At this point, I feel like that's when the consistency is coming in for this album. Once we get around Little Wonders, Animals, and Demigod, which is absolutely powerfully beautiful. The drums are barreling ahead on the verses and adding some extra power to the choruses, and then the chord progression is beautiful, and the piano and string parts in the interlude add a nice touch. I also love the build on the breakdown. It is one of the better building songs on this album. Even the altered vocals don't really bother me in terms of the electronics, especially because how the rest of that part built. It's super powerful, talking about one's effect on the world. Meteor, the next song, is just super straightforward. However, there's a bunch to enjoy in this song. I love the sparse and atmospheric verses, which is so interesting when it's compared to the activity of the drums and the power of the choruses. The breakdown also has a solid build, especially when the drums come in. They have that whoa chorus. It does feel a little bit poppy, but for the most part, super solid song. To round out the rest of the best parts, Dynas is absolutely safe. Feels very similar to the closing song of Amo, but it has a little bit more depth to it because of the strings, because of the chord progression, because of the pace of it. It's beautiful. It has an interesting take on the idea of death, the end, and not being afraid. For an album that doesn't have a lot of light parts, this is a weirdly hopeful song. Nice way of ending what is a super intense album. Yeah, there are some songs I'm not hugely a fan of. Giving Blood is one of the more straightforward songs on the album. It's alright. It has some good drum work. I'm just not a huge fan of the electronic work, and I'm not a huge fan of most of the vocals other than the chorus. On the other side of it, In Ordinary Extinction brings back those Bring Me the Horizon comparisons because it has that bounce of Ludens, but also I'm not a huge fan of the chorus. I don't like the high work on terms of the vocals on this song. At least the drumming is, again, super awesome. Impermanence, decent chorus, but the verses just feel not interesting at all. Doesn't feel like it has any sort of form in my opinion. And then Goliath, solid arrangement. I like the touches of horns and strings throughout the song, especially on the bridge. I also enjoy the intensity from the guitar and drums. But honestly, it's another one that just doesn't have memorable verse melody, in my opinion. Overall, not a bad album. I have a problem remembering if I like this better than Holy Hell or not. I think it's different. I think some people who have enjoyed Architects over the years are not going to necessarily like this album because it is a little bit more on the simplistic side, a little bit more on the electronic side. People will yell that they went to the same side as Bring Me the Horizon. I think there's at least stuff there that has some saving graces. The complexity of some of the arrangements is interesting. The drum work is much better than anything that Bring Me the Horizon has ever done. At least there's stuff there. But for an album that is almost 60 minutes long and an album that has a lot of very similar ideas, I can't say that it deserves a full album listen. If you are like a super Architects fan, give it a full listen. For me, it's a pick and choose. For me, it's like Black Lungs, This Course is Dead, Dead Butterflies, Flight Without Feathers, Little Wonders, Animals, Demigod, Meteor, and Dying is absolutely safe. It's a decent amount, but I listened to this album in bits and pieces at times, and I think that helped. Still not bad, but I don't see this becoming one of my favorite albums of the year. And finally, we have Soen with Imperial. Yes, this Swedish progressive metal supergroup has put out their 5th album, their first album since Loathe, which was my favorite album of theirs. So close to making the top 10 of 2019. I think it was like 13 or 12. What made it stand out in comparison to Cognitive, Tellurium, and Lycaia is there was a little bit more diversity in terms of the arrangements. This band, to me, is very similar to like Breaking Benjamin, where it's super formulaic at times, but at least a lot of what they do is super technical, and a lot of the arrangements are super interesting. A lot of the drum work is absolutely solid. But the problem that you usually get with this band is the formula, at least for the last few albums, is we got this super interesting riff at the beginning, and then we get to the verse, and then we get like another like interlude riff that is a little bit faster in tempo, and then we get to the chorus that's awesome, and then we get to a verse and then maybe a chorus, but usually it's a breakdown part where things slow down and soften for a minute and then it builds back up. For one song, not a bad thing. When it's a whole entire album, it becomes an issue, like with what I had with Lycaia. I liked certain songs on that album. My brother still contends that it's an awesome album. I think it is too, but it was like in my bottom part of the 50s for 2017. It was because so many of the songs sounded similar that by the time I got to the 8th track, it was like, okay, I've heard this before. At least with Lotus, there was enough difference that made me super happy to continually listen to the album. Of course, though, my brother has raved about this album, and I'm kind of on the similar page. I don't know if it hits the highs as Lotus just yet, but man, it starts strong. Lumerian has that formulaic approach. But man, the formula is still super awesome. I love the chorus melody with the use of triplets in the vocal melody. The drums, super solid. And the guitar solo during the bridge is also a nice touch. Love Deceiver, one of my favorite Soen songs ever. The guitar on throughout that song is super cool. I love the fast-picked parts in the interludes, the bounce on the verses, the flowing chords in the pre-chorus, and the rhythmic bounces on the chorus. The vocal melody is top-notch, especially on the chorus. One of my favorite chorus melodies that they've ever done. I love the staccato nature on the verses as well. Guitar interlude before the second chorus, absolutely killer. And then that part where it breaks down for a second, it's formulaic, but it's not long enough where it's annoying. The only thing I'm not a fan of is there's a flat 7 on the Drown My Awareness of You part on the last chorus. I know it's like a super small thing, but I always pick it out. It just sounds weird in comparison to the harmony. It shouldn't be there in my opinion, but it's not too long to totally destroy everything. Monarch, another super hit. Absolutely love the chorus. So simple in the motion and the harmony, but it's so effective. So much power. I love how the song gets into the groove with the delay start before just getting heavy with the guitar and drums. It's not fast, but the guitar is still effective with its use of rhythms and octaves. Drums have great fills. The verse melody feels dark, and it's talking about a monarch sending people to war. A lot of this album seems to be about government and fighting against the ruling class to make a better world. Definitely more of a political album from this band. Love the outro with the layering of voices at the end. Super cool. Then we get a pause from the heavy with Illusion. A solid song, one of their better ballads that they've done. I love the chorus melody on there. The only thing that drops it down for me is that it feels like a mixture between Lucidity from Likaya and Lotus from Lotus, to the point where it just feels like it's carbon copy, and that's where it kind of hurts, because like Lotus was the 4th track on Lotus and this is the 4th track on this particular album, so there's similarities. However, it is a beautiful song and a great way of breaking up the formulaic parts of this album. The second half of the album isn't as strong as the first half, but weirdly enough, not necessarily for the same reasons as what I have not necessarily liked on their first 3 albums. Yes, there are some songs that just like continue that same vibe that are good, but just aren't super interesting comparatively to the first 4 songs. Antagonist doesn't necessarily have the best verses because they kind of sound similar to other verses from some other Soen songs. The guitar part is interesting enough to not have it to become an issue. And the chorus is also pretty solid. The woe chorus parts, though, sound very clunky. But the breakdown helps the song this time around, because that's where the song fully commits and is super awesome. The drums are the star of the show during that section, being super active and filling the space between the quiet parts of the solo, but also adding some power when the distorted guitar comes back in. I also really enjoyed the piano break before the last chorus, as well as the fact that the last chorus actually changes up the drum and guitar parts. Dissident is where we start feeling a little bit repetitive in comparison to everything else on the album. There's even a part that has the line "Ask Yourself," which I'm pretty sure is similar to, I want to say, Lascivious from Lotus. But that being said, the song hits a little bit harder than some of the other songs on the album. I love the change up of the drumming on the chorus. The guitar part isn't super complex, but it has an intensity to it that I enjoy, especially on the pre-choruses. The guitar solo is also a nice touch, leading into a breakdown that, as beautiful it is, sounds a little bit forced. But I do love the building back up to the chorus on this. It does just enough to not make it forgettable. Where I think the problems lie on this album, though, is actually where they kind of stray away from this formula. Modesty is weird to me because it's one of the more different sounding songs on the album. The verses being pretty sparse with some guitar work echoing in and out of the song, meaning that the drums and the vocals do most of the work, but the melody isn't super interesting and the drums feel too active with nothing else around it. The strings during the interlude are also nice, but again, they feel over the top because there is not much around. At least the chorus is super solid, and the guitar solo also helps with the energy of the song, but all in all, the experiment doesn't necessarily fully work in my opinion. The last song on the album, Fortune, supposed to feel like this epic and grand finale for the album. It's slow, it's heavy, it has some nice string and woodwind parts, so it feels complex. However, the song feels super plotty when compared to the rest of the album. It almost feels like this is an attempt of like a quasi doom metal song for them, but they just don't commit. I'm also not a huge fan of the vocals on this song, especially on the chorus. It feels like a lot of the higher stuff that Joel's trying to attempt on here feels super strained. It's not a horrendous song, and I appreciate the experiment, but in terms of a lasting image, it's not great. And it's kind of similar to Lotus, in my opinion. The last song on Lotus also wasn't amazing either. It's weird. As much as I love Lotus, I've yet to find an album where I can like remember every single song and every single song feels like its own entity. And that's what the most frustrating thing about this band is. At least on the plus side, this album's only 8 tracks and it's only 42, 43 minutes. It's not too long. And I think there's enough there that like satiates the need of some really solid progressive metal. I just wish that there was just a little bit more depth and diversity. They did like 10 tracks with a little bit more diversity. They could easily make an album of the year, in my opinion. That being said, with everything else that's going on right now, it's still like a viable candidate. It'll definitely most likely be in my top 20 by the end of the year. I think this will eventually grow on me more. I think it's short enough that I can say that this is a play on repeat. There are so many songs on here that I super enjoy. It's just really hard sometimes to like listen to it fully, but I don't think this is going to be a drudge for me like Lakaya was listening to over and over again. That's all of it. This took forever. There was a lot to talk about. In terms of rankings, the clear-cut number 7 is You're Welcome. Some nice stuff on there, but nothing to like make me want to fully listen to that album. Number 6, I would say, For Those Who Wish to Exist. There are some decent stuff on there, but to listen to the full album is kind of a drudge in my opinion. Number 5, we go with The Things They Believe. Not necessarily a super memorable album, but to at least listen to it once, it is nice, it is serene, it hits all the right vibes. Number 4, we have Medicine at Midnight. Some nice stuff on the album, but in my opinion, not one of Foo Fighters' best works. Number 3, we go with The Future Bites. Again, some solid stuff on there. I like the vibe of most of that album, but not necessarily my favorite Steven Wilson or Steven Wilson adjacent projects. Number 2, we have Imperial, another solid outing by Soen. Just wish that the ending was a little bit better. And then number 1, we have Neuratias. Really solid album from Chevelle. It's going to be really hard to top this at this point in time. We still have a bunch of the year left, but this is a solid outing. I would be shocked if this album didn't make my top 20. That is my time. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to try to play around with it for next time so that this isn't an hour-long video. But I appreciate you watching. If you watched all this, there was a lot in there. I hope you got a lot out of this. If you enjoyed this video or this type of video, like it so I know that you enjoyed watching this. Share this with your friends if they find this interesting. And most importantly, subscribe to my channel. That way I know that you enjoy what I'm doing and want to see more of these videos, albeit a lot shorter, in the future. I will be back either Sunday or Monday for another 7 to Satisfy. Until then, this is The Music Fan, and I'm signing off.